3 weeks ago, none of you would even look at me. Now you want to burn me for being beautiful. My grandmother died and 7 days later I woke up like this. They call it a curse. Let me show you the real curse. Before you light that fire, look at me. Really look at me.
Firewood was already stacked to her knees when Adaeze realized they truly meant to burn her. Dawn had not fully broken over the village of Umuano, but the square was packed shoulder to shoulder. Men gripped torches, women clutched their children and pointed. And in the center of it all, bound to a wooden post with rope that bit into her wrists, knelt a woman so beautiful that even the morning mist seemed to part around her face. The priest, Ezeala, raised his staff of carved bone toward the brightening sky. This is no woman. No woman becomes beautiful in 7 days. This is a spirit wearing stolen skin. Burn it and let the curse return to the grave it crawled out of. The crowd roared. A torch was lifted. Adaeze lifted her head and the rising sun caught her face. The face they once spattered. The face they once called ash. Look at me, she whispered. Before you burn me, look at me. And then she smiled. To understand how a forgotten girl became the most beautiful woman in the land and why that beauty nearly killed her, we have to go back. Back 3 weeks. Back to the morning her grandmother began to die. 3 weeks earlier, before the sun had any strength in it, Adaeze was already at the river. She always came before the others. She came when the water was still grey and the path was empty because that was the only time no one would stare, no one would whisper, no one would call her the name that had followed her since she was a child of 6, when a cooking fire had leapt on her cheek and left a scar that climbed from her jaw to the corner of her eye. Ntwantu, the ash girl. She filled her clay pot, balanced it on her head, and walked back with her eyes down. By the time she reached the compound, the village was waking and her cousins were already laughing. There she is, called Ngozi, stretching in the doorway like a cat. The ash girl. Did the river frighten you back to us? Beside her, Chioma covered her nose. She smells of smoke. She always smells of smoke. Adaeze said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence costs less than answering. She carried the water past them, past her aunt Ekweme, who sat plaiting Chioma's hair and did not look up except to bark. When you finish, sweep the yard and don't let me find dust in the corners. There was only one door in that compound Adaeze walked toward without dread. It was the small hut at the back, where the air smelled of dried roots and bitter leaf, where a fire always burned low in a clay pot. Inside, on a raised mat, lay the oldest woman in Umuano, Nne Ozioma. The village feared her. They called her Dibia, herbalist, medicine woman, knower of secrets. When a child burned with fever in the deep of night, when a woman could not carry a pregnancy, when a man's farm refused to yield, they came to her door, wrapped in shadows so the neighbors would not see. They took her cures, and in the daylight, they crossed to the other side of the path so her shadow would not touch them. But to Adaeze, she was simply Nne, grandmother, the only person on earth who loved her. You went to the river in the dark again, the old woman said without opening her eyes. The water is cleaner before the goats reach it, Adaeze answered, kneeling to stir the fire. Nne Ozioma's eyes opened then, sharp and black despite her age. You go before the goats so you can avoid the people. Do not lie to your grandmother, child. I see better with my eyes closed than this whole village sees with theirs open. Adaeze smiled faintly and pressed a cup of warm broth into the old woman's trembling hands. Drink, Nne, you are too thin. The old woman drank, but her hand shook and broth spilled down her chin, and Adaeze saw, truly saw, how frail she had become. The shoulders that once carried firewood through the forest were now bird thin. The skin hung loose, and there was a grayness in her face that had not been there at the last moon. Nne, Adaeze said quietly, you are not well. The old woman set down the cup. For a long moment, she only looked at her granddaughter, at the scarred cheek, the downcast eyes, the worn wrapper she had patched a dozen times. No, she said at last, I am not, and there are things I must tell you before the time comes, but not today. Today, you must sweep your aunt's yard before she takes the cane to your back. Go. Adaeze went. She did not know it would be one of the last ordinary mornings of her old life. The sickness took Nne Ozioma quickly, the way harmattan wind strips a tree. Within days, she could not rise from her mat. Within a week, she could barely lift her head. Word spread through the village that the old medicine woman was dying, and the reaction told Adaeze everything she needed to know about the people around her. No one came to help. The same villagers who had crept to that hut in the night now stayed away, as though death were a thing that could leap from one body to another like fleas. Ekweme did not send so much as a bowl of soup. Ngozi and Chioma laughed louder than ever because a suitor was coming for Ngozi that week, a wealthy man's son from the next village, and a dying old woman at the back of the compound was an embarrassment they wished gone.
So Adaeze nursed her grandmother alone. She bathed the frail body with warm water and soft cloth. She ground the bitter roots the old woman pointed to with a shaking finger. She slept on the bare floor beside the mat, so that if Nels Yoma woke in the night afraid, she would not be alone. And on the 7th night, the old woman's eyes flew open, suddenly clear. "Adaeze," she breathed, "come close. The time has come, and I have little of it left." Adaeze knelt, her heart pounding. "Ne, don't speak of leaving." "Hush." The old woman's hand found hers with surprising strength. "Listen, because I will only say this once, and your life will turn upon it." She drew a breath that rattled in her chest. "Reach beneath my mat. There, the cloth bundle." Adaeze's fingers closed on something wrapped in faded indigo cloth. She drew it out and unwound it, and there, resting in her palm, lay a comb. It was carved from black wood, old as the hills, its teeth worn smooth, and the handle shaped into the figure of a woman with no face. "This passed to me from my grandmother," Nels Yoma whispered, "and to her from hers, back and back beyond all counting. It does not give beauty, child. Hear me. It does not give beauty. It gives truth. And in this world, truth wears the face of a curse." "I don't understand," Adaeze said. "You will." The old woman's grip tightened. "Now swear to me, when I am gone and they have put me in the ground, you will go to the river before dawn. You will dip this comb in the water and you will draw it through your hair. And then," her eyes burned into Adaeze's, "for 7 days you will not let water touch your face, no matter what you see, no matter what they say, not until the 7th dawn. Swear it." "Ne, swear it." "I swear it, Inne." The old woman's body sank back into the mat, and something in her face softened, as though a weight she had carried for 80 years had finally rolled from her shoulders. "They called me a curse too," she murmured, her voice growing faint. "Once, long ago, I had a face that stopped the breath of men, and they feared what they could not own. Remember, my child, beauty is not a gift, it is a debt, and the time has come for them to pay." Her chest rose once more. It did not rise again. Adaeze sat in the dark, holding her grandmother's cooling hand, and the silence of the world pressed down on her like water closing over a drowning girl. She did not weep loudly. She had learned long ago that the ash girl's tears amused people. She wept silently, the comb pressed to her heart, alone in the only place she had ever been loved. They buried Nels Yoma the next morning with indecent haste. The men dug the grave at the edge of the compound, and the village watched from a distance, and no one sang the songs that should be sung for an elder. Ekweme stood with her arms folded, already eyeing the dead woman's hut. "That space will do for a good pen. At last, something useful from that corner." Adaeze stood at the graveside, the indigo bundle hidden against her body, and she felt the cousin's eyes on her. It was Chioma who struck first. "What is that you are hiding, Ash girl?" "Nothing." "She is hiding something," Ngozi said, stepping closer. "The old witch must have left her some charm, some juju." Her hand shot out. "Give it here." Adaeze twisted away, clutching the bundle. "It is mine. It is nothing of yours." For a moment, the two cousins loomed over her, and Adaeze braced for the blows that usually followed her defiance. But Ekweme's voice cut across the yard. "Leave the wretched thing alone and come. The suitor arrives this afternoon, and I will not have you smelling of grave dust." She sniffed in Adaeze's direction. "Let the ash girl keep her dead woman's rubbish. It suits her." They left her there.
And that night, while the compound feasted and laughed and welcomed Ngozi's wealthy suitor, Adaeze slipped out into the darkness and walked the long path to the river, the black wood comb in her hand. The water was black glass under a thin moon. She knelt at its edge, dipped the comb beneath the surface, and, as her grandmother had sworn her to do, drew it slowly through her hair. Nothing happened. No thunder, no spirits, only the sigh of the wind in the reeds and the distant laughter from the compound that had never wanted her. Adaeze almost laughed at her own foolishness, but a promise was a promise, and she had sworn on a dying woman's hand. So she wrapped the comb away, and she did not let the water touch her face, and she walked home and lay down on the bare floor of the empty hut where her grandmother's scent still lingered. The 7 days had begun. The first day, nothing. The second day, her skin began to itch, a deep crawling warmth beneath the surface, as though something stirred under her flesh. By the third day, the itching became a faint glow. At night, in the dark of the hut, Adaeze held up her arm and gasped. Her skin shimmered ever so slightly, like the underside of a leaf catching moonlight. She pressed her hands to her face and felt a strange smoothness creeping across the scar that had marked her for 14 years. She wanted to run to the river and look. She wanted desperately to splash the water on her face and see, but her grandmother's words held her like iron. No matter what you see, no matter what they say, not until the 7th dawn. The cousins noticed something had changed, though they could not say what. "You look different," Ngozi said, frowning. "Have you been stealing palm oil for your skin?" "Leave her," Chioma said, but she too was staring. On the 5th day, a fever struck Adaeze like a falling tree. She burned, sweat soaked her wrapper, and her head pounded, and her whole body screamed for the cool of water on her face. She stumbled to the clay pot in the corner and cupped the water in her shaking hands and raised it toward her burning cheeks, and the indigo bundle, resting on the mat, seemed to catch the firelight and gleam. Adaeze stopped. Water dripped through her fingers. She looked at the bundle, at the place where her grandmother had pressed it into her hand, and she heard the old voice again. "Swear it." She let the water fall. She did not touch her face, and she lay back down on the floor and shook with fever through the night, and somewhere in the darkness she felt the warmth pass through her like a fire burning out, leaving something new behind. On the 6th day, the fever broke. She felt strangely light, strangely whole. And on the 7th dawn, Adaeze rose before the sun, took the black wood comb, and walked to the river to finally look upon her own face. The water was still. The first grey light touched the surface as she knelt. Adaeze drew a breath, leaned forward, and looked at her reflection. A stranger looked back. The scar was gone, not faded, gone, as though the fire had never touched her. Her skin was deep and luminous, like polished mahogany lit from within. Her eyes, once downcast and dull, were wide and bright and impossibly clear. Her face had the symmetry of something carved by a god in a generous mood, a beauty so complete that it did not belong to the world of dust and goats and morning chores. Adaeze touched her cheek with trembling fingers, half expecting the reflection to be a trick of the light. It was real. A sound escaped her, half a laugh, half a sob. For the first time in her life, she was looking at a face that no one would mock, a face that no one would call ash.
But beneath the joy, cold and quiet, came her grandmother's warning, surfacing like a stone rising through water. It does not give beauty. It gives truth, and truth wears the face of a curse. Adaeze did not yet understand what that meant. She would learn before the day was through. She walked back into the village as the sun cleared the trees and the world stopped to stare. A farmer dropped his hoe. A woman fetching water let her pot slip and shatter on the ground. Children froze in their games. They looked at this radiant stranger walking the path of Umuano, and they did not know her. Until she reached her own compound and her aunt Ekweme came out, and the recognition dawned like a thunderclap. "Adaeze," Ekweme's voice cracked. "Is that? It cannot be." Ngozi appeared in the doorway, and her face, when she understood, twisted into something ugly and raw. The suitor who had come for her had eyes only now for the woman in the yard.
Chioma's mouth fell open. "What have you done?" Ngozi breathed. "What have you done to yourself, ash girl?" Before Adaeze could answer, a man pushed through the gathering crowd. Okeke, a trader who had mocked her cruelly for years, who had once thrown mud at her in the market for sport. He stopped before her, staring up at her face, and something strange came over him. His eyes went wide, his mouth worked, and then, to the shock of all, he fell to his knees. "Forgive me," he choked out. "The grain, I cheated you. I cheated the widow in Kechi. I have been stealing from the measures for 10 years. God forgive me. I cannot." He clutched his head and wept, confessing crime after crime, as though the words were being pulled from his throat by an invisible hand. Then he scrambled up and fled the village, and he did not return. A horrified silence fell. It was then that Ngozi found her weapon. She pointed a shaking finger at Adaeze and screamed for all to hear, "Witch! No woman becomes beautiful in 7 days. She has used the old witch's juju. She traded her soul. She stole this beauty from the dead, and now she makes men lose their minds. She is cursed! Cursed!" The word spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Cursed! 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 If Adaeze had hoped beauty would bring her peace, she learned within a day that it brought only a different kind of war. The whispers became a roar. Mothers pulled their children indoors when she passed. Men stared, then looked away ashamed, then stared again. And everywhere she went, the strange thing happened. Those who looked at her with greed, with lust, with cruelty in their hearts seemed unable to bear it. Their secrets spilled from their mouths. Their guilt bent them double. But those few who were kind, the widow and Kechi, a gentle old man named Dimba, looked at Adaeze and saw only a girl. A beautiful girl, yes, but only a girl. To them, she was no curse at all. Slowly, Adaeze began to understand her grandmother's riddle. It gives truth. The comb had not made her beautiful to be admired. It had made her a mirror. Those who looked upon her saw reflected back the truth of their own hearts, and the wicked could not survive the sight. But understanding did not make her safe. For word of the beautiful woman of Umuano reached the ears of Chief Obiora. He was the richest, proudest man in 3 villages, a man with 4 wives and the temper of a wounded leopard. He had passed Adaeze in the market once before and called her a disgusting thing and spat at her feet. Now he arrived in the compound in his finest robes, his servants behind him, and he looked at Adaeze with hungry, possessive eyes. "I will have her," he announced, as though she were a goat at market. "Bring her to my compound by the new moon. She will be my 5th wife." He smiled, and it did not reach his eyes. "Name your price, Ekweme. I am a generous man." And Ekweme, who had never given Adaeze a kind word in her life, saw a fortune standing in her yard and smiled back. "Of course, great chief, we are family. We will prepare her." But in the chief's compound, his first wife was watching. Her name was Nkeneka, and she had ruled that household with an iron will for 20 years, and she did not intend to be displaced by a younger, more beautiful woman. As the chief left, Nkeneka's eyes narrowed to slits. If beauty was the girl's weapon, Nkeneka thought, then beauty would be made the rope to hang her. The trap was sprung 3 days later, and it was woven with terrible cleverness. A child in the village fell sick, truly sick, burning with a fever that would not break. It was the kind of illness Neozioma might once have cured, but Neozioma was in the ground, and in her place was only her granddaughter, the beautiful, frightening, cursed girl. Nkaneka saw her chance. In the dead of night, she sent a servant to bury charms beneath the threshold of the sick child's home, bundles of feathers and bone and red thread, the very image of dark juju. And in the morning, she made certain they were discovered. "It is the witch," the cry went up. "The cursed girl has bewitched the child. She has cursed us all." The village, already drowning in fear, needed no further proof. They wanted someone to blame for the beauty they could not explain, the confessions they could not unhear, the unease that had gripped them since the 7th dawn. And here, handed to them, was their witch. They came for Adaeze at dusk. She did not run. Where would she run to? She had no one. They dragged her from her grandmother's hut and bound her hands, and her cousins watched with naked satisfaction, and her aunt did not lift a finger to stop them, because a dead niece was easier than explaining to a chief why her bride had been a witch. They threw her in the elder's hut to await judgment, and through the long night, Adaeze pressed the black wood comb, hidden still in the folds of her wrapper, against her heart, and she spoke to her grandmother in the dark. I don't understand, Ne. You said this was an inheritance. You said it was truth, but they are going to kill me for it. What truth is worth this? The comb gave no answer, but somewhere in the silence, Adaeze remembered the last thing her grandmother had said. The time has come for them to pay. And slowly, in the dark, the ash girl understood what she had to do. They brought her to the square at dawn. You know this part. You have seen it already. The firewood stuck to her knees, the post at her back, the priest Isiala with his staff of bone, the whole village crowded close with torches and hungry eyes. The cousins stood at the front. Ekweme stood beside the chief, who had come to watch his would-be bride burn rather than belong to another. And in the shadows at the edge, the first wife Keneka was watching with cold triumph. This is no woman, Isiala thundered. No woman becomes beautiful in 7 days. This is a spirit wearing stolen skin. Burn it and let the curse return to the grave it crawled out of. The crowd roared. A torch was lifted. And Adaeze lifted her head. Look at me, she whispered. Then louder, so it carried across the square. Look at me. Before you burn me, look at me. And she smiled. The torchbearer hesitated, caught by that face. The crowd quieted, drawn forward despite themselves. And Adaeze turned her head slowly and she let them look, truly look into her eyes, one after another, the way her grandmother had taught her, without ever saying the words. She looked first at the priest. Isiala met her gaze and his face changed, his mouth opened, and the words came pouring out of him, helpless, unstoppable. The offerings, he gasped, the yams the village bring to the shrine, I have been keeping them for myself, selling them for 20 years. I am no holy man. I am a thief who hides behind the gods. He dropped his staff and clutched his throat as if to stop the confession, but it would not stop. The crowd gasped and pulled away from him. Adaeze turned to her cousins. Ngozi's eyes locked with hers and she shrieked, I lied, the juju, the charms. I always hated her. I wanted her gone because she was kind and I was not, because Ne loved her and never me. She clamped her hands over her mouth, but Chioma was already babbling beside her, confessing every cruelty, every theft, every lie of their shared childhood. Adaeze turned to the chief. Obiora tried to look away and could not. I only wanted her to own her, like a thing, like a horse. I have beaten my wives. I have crushed men who crossed me. I have buried a rival in my own yam field. The crowd recoiled from him in horror. And finally, Adaeze turned her eyes to the shadows, to Nkeneka. The first wife had time only to whisper no before the truth tore loose. I buried the charms. There is no witch. I framed her because my husband wanted her, and I would rather see her burn than bow to a younger wife. The child's sickness is fever, only fever. I am the liar. I am the wicked one, not her, not her. The square erupted into chaos. The truth, once loosed, could not be gathered back. The villagers turned on the priest who robbed them, on the chief who murdered, on the cousins who lied, on the first wife who had nearly made them all murderers of an innocent girl. The firewood was kicked aside. Hands that had come to bind Adaeze now fumbled at her ropes to free her, desperate to be on the side of the truth now that the truth stood before them. And Adaeze stood at the center of it all, untouched, unburned, and finally understood. She climbed onto the very post they had bound her to, and she raised her freed hands, and the square fell silent. My grandmother told me beauty is not a gift, she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the square. For 14 years, you looked at my scar and you called me ash. You looked at the outside of me and you decided what was within. You never once looked closer. You never once looked true. She turned slowly, meeting their eyes, and now they flinched from her not in fear of a curse, but in shame for their guilt. This face you wanted to burn is not a curse, she said. It is a mirror. Everything you have seen today, everything you have heard confessed, it was always inside you. I did not put it there. I only made you unable to look away. The curse was never on me. Her voice dropped, and yet every soul heard it. The curse was always in you. No one spoke. The priest knelt weeping in the dust. The chief had fled. Ngozi and Chioma could not lift their faces. My grandmother carried this truth alone, she said softly. You called her a witch and took her cures in the dark and shunned her in the light. And she bore it without bitterness because she knew what you would not learn today, that the ugliest thing in any village is never the scar on a girl's face. It is the rot in a proud heart that calls itself righteous.
She stepped down from the post. The crowd parted before her like water. And Adaeze walked back to the small hut at the back of the compound where her grandmother's scent still lingered. And she was no longer alone because the whole village now knew her name and feared the truth in her eyes. In the seasons that followed, Umuano became a different place. Word of the woman whose face revealed the truth spread far beyond the village. The wicked learned to stay away from Umuano, for they could not bear to stand before her. But the wronged came, they cheated, they falsely accused, they powerless, and they brought their disputes before her, because in her presence no lie could live. She never married the chief. OBY'S crimes had condemned him, and his compound fell to ruin. She never punished her cousins. She did not need to. They lived out their days in a village that knew exactly what they were, and that was punishment enough. And every 7th dawn, Adaeze returned to the river. She would kneel at the water's edge and look at her reflection, not at the beauty that nearly killed her, but at the girl who still lived beneath it, the loyal girl, the one who nursed a dying woman alone when the whole world turned away, the one who kept her promise through fever and fear. That girl, she had come to understand, was the true inheritance. The face was only the mirror that finally made the world see her. "Thank you, Ne," she would whisper to the water. "I understand now. Beauty is a debt, and I will spend my life paying it forward in truth." And the river, as it had always, kept her secret and shone. If this story moved you, if you felt for the ash girl who stayed loyal when the whole world turned its back on her, then do something for me before you go. Ask yourself one question and leave your answer in the comments below. If you had stood in that square at dawn with the torches burning and the crowd screaming "witch," would you have been brave enough to speak up for Adaeze? Or would you have stayed silent with the rest? I read every comment and I want to know the truth in your heart. If you believe, like Neozioma's grandmother, that the truth always outlasts the lie, tap that like button to help this story reach someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more African folk tales that carry the wisdom of our ancestors, stories of curses and courage, of the forgotten ones who rise, then subscribe and ring the bell, because the next tale I have for you is one you will not want to miss. Remember the words of Neozioma: beauty is not a gift, it is a debt. And the ugliest thing in any village is never the scar on a face, it is the rot in a heart too proud to look in the mirror. Until the next story, walk in truth.